what would be really helpful, just to kind of just to make sure that everyone's on the same sort of page, would be if I'll ask, you can decide which one of you will do definition for a DNA group, and which one of you will do a kind of explanation of what a missional community is, just so that we kind of understand each other. When you're talking about them later on, we go, okay, that's what they mean by this. So just as a kind of a ground layer, what's a missional community and what's a DNA group in your kind of understanding?
Yeah. I'll try to describe how we understand a missional community. We call them gospel communities here at our church in San Diego. And so simply, it's a group of people, we would say, that are committed to each other as family. Think about each other like family, plan even our schedules, considering the others that are part of the community as family, praying for each other like family. Just that family dynamic is really, really significant for us. Something that I believe is important. So San Diego is a city of about 2 million. So it's large city, very spread, covers a large area. But our gospel communities are organized around a proximity or a specific area. And so everybody that makes up our gospel community lives about 10 minutes driving from each other. And so what that allows for is just a lot of life to be lived naturally together, because there's not the constant challenge of driving, of transportation issues and fighting traffic, and you come home from work and somebody lives too far away and you don't feel like getting together for a meal or going to the park. When you live closer, you're just much more likely to live a lot of life together. And then you're much more likely for your relationships with non-Christians to overlap, because again, they usually, not always, but they usually are also coming from that part of the city, or are more likely to live some of their life in that part of the city. So it's easy to overlap our relationships with non-Christians. So a missional community, we would say, simply is a family that's trying to live intentionally together on mission.
Great. And a DNA group, how would you describe that, Hannah?
I would describe a DNA group as a smaller group, usually 3 or 4 people that are the same gender, and they are committed to a deeper level of friendship and discipleship together, to nurture each other and challenge each other and love each other well, in a way that really only the same gender can together. And it's easy to be much more flexible. So you're not trying to spend time together and figure out 10 people's schedules. It's just a few of you, and you're really committed in friendship. And then for like probably 12 years now of being in DNA groups, to me, it's just so much easier for genuine discipleship and care to happen. So much easier when you have these smaller groups. And I mean, I could talk more about why, but I guess for now, just a definition is good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's great. One quick clarification then. So a DNA is a subset or a substructure of a missional community. So it's not like a separate group of people. You have the people you don't have the people in your missional community and then another group of people that are part of your DNA, because again, it comes back to that identity and calling to be family. We're trying to live as much life together, try to live as deeply together as possible. Then these two structures or environments basically work together. They complement each other. So stuff that happens in missional community is gonna affect what you talk about in your DNAs often.
Yeah.
Because you see things working out in your missional community as you're on mission, as you're at a meal, as you're throwing a party, that then can be talked about in your DNA. And then same thing the other direction. Stuff that you work out in your DNA just strengthens the life of the missional community.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So what, Grace Church guys, just want you to be thinking about questions as well. So if you want a question, you want to sort of stop along and ask a question, just put it in the chat, and then we can take the question, or just save them up. We'll make sure that there's time sort of later on to kind of, you know, could be practical, could be kind of theory, whatever it is. Feel free to ask the questions. We really want it to be really helpful. So Todd and Hannah, Hannah, you said you talk about the why. So could you do that? Give us the why for the DNA groups and the why for the gospel communities. If they're the answer, what's really the question that kind of has led you to these things being a way forward?
Well, I'll say a few things about DNA groups from a woman's perspective. One of the things that, I don't know if this happens in Sweden, but many times in churches, you will hear people, when they're very honest, they will say, I just don't feel connected to anybody, truly connected, or I don't know if that anyone really knows my story or, you know, my real struggles. I feel, because even in a missional community, there are husbands, wives, singles, children. It's a larger atmosphere. And so you're not always going to be deeply known in that space. And you may not have an opportunity to really share how you're doing that day even, or what's going on. I found that if you have some DNA groups within the life of your church, it really meets that deep need to be known and to know and to be in really authentic friendship and to be connected with other believers. I think that it also is really, really great because there are so many different personalities in the way that God made people. And so certain people, their personality is they will go deep and talk with whoever. They're open. They share everything. And most personalities are not as much that way. And so I find that in DNA groups, we have these smaller groupings of either men or women. There's a space for every personality to be, for their needs to be met and who they are. And they cannot just be anonymous, or maybe they're that person who in a larger group, they're not going to talk because they want to consider the needs of everyone else because they're so caring or other-centered, and so I feel like every personality, introverted, extroverted, shy, loud, whatever, is able to really be cared for well and at a deep level. And I feel like that's really hard when there's no component like that going on in church family. It happens here and there, right? But it's not guaranteed to happen for every person you're trying to shepherd as the leadership of a church. And so DNA groups are a great way to kind of make sure that every person has the opportunity to be cared for at a deep level, if they want that. They don't always want it, and that's fine too. So I know over the years, many times I have been in a group with somebody, and one of the first things we will do was each person will really share the whole story of their life with each other, from growing up to present. And many times women will say, I have never shared that with anybody. Never. And it feels so good for all of me, my whole story, to really be known and treasured. And that opens so much opportunity for gospel growth and discipleship. If a person can really share their whole story, and it's a safe place. And opportunities then for the Holy Spirit to speak into those wounds or those hurts or whatever that may be. And so DNA allows for that. And just to clarify, like right now, the DNA I have, we only meet together every 2 weeks. Sometimes every week is great, but all of us in this particular DNA right now are moms, and and we meet at 8 o'clock at night. We hang out from like 8 to 10:30 at night. Every other week. I've been in DNAs where we meet every week, but you can customize when is good for you because you're only considering 3 or 4 people's schedules. And as we know, people that do have young children, it changes all the time. Bedtimes change. And so you're able to just do a lot more that's real life. So the other thing, and I talked about this a little bit, is just that as deep friendships are forming in these communities, one thing that happens too is just the health of people, their marital health, their emotional health, their mental health, like all of these issues can really come up much more. And I feel like we can shepherd our people and be shepherded much better. And then one thing I've seen happen is if you have a healthy DNA situation, then each person in that DNA, they have friends who don't know Jesus yet. And the scripture talks about how that one of the ways that non-believers will come to know God is by seeing our love for each other. And I really feel like I've been able, the friendships and the closest I have in my DNA groups has been an example of God and his love to many people I know who don't know Jesus. Even just now before this meeting, I had to hurry back because I was on a walk in my neighborhood with my 5-year-old. I was trying to get him out of the house on a walk to get his energy out before I came to this meeting. So I went over to this new friend we've met because of quarantine. We've been going on many neighborhood walks, many neighborhood walks. Yesterday, our 5-year-old sat down on the sidewalk and he said, "No more, no more." And he didn't want to go anywhere. But so we met this new family and we have gone in each other's backyards a little bit. So this morning I went to their backyard. We played for 15 minutes, but I was thinking to myself, and then we had them over to swim 2 days ago as well. And I was thinking to myself, I'm so thankful that I have a gospel community, a missional community, and that I have a close group of women in my DNA, because as soon as quarantine is over, I have people in my life that are going to be excited to meet my new friend who doesn't know God yet. And I was so thankful that we have some of these structures in our lives because I thought, well, when quarantine is over, we'll probably have a party, in some kind of a party in our yard, and I'm going to invite this new family, and they get to meet the people in my gospel community. And the people in my gospel community will know, hey, I have this new friend, and they're going to be coming, so welcome them. And as far as I know, they do not know Jesus, and so I just felt really thankful today to have that in place already in my life, because we're a family and we have this idea that we are going to be on mission to the people God brings in our lives. I can know that that's something to look forward to and to plan around. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Can I make one comment about something she said from a male perspective? But actually it's similar. When I started my current DNA with the guys that I'm with, we basically told the 45-minute version of our stories, where you can talk about a lot of your life in 45 minutes. And from the very beginning, that's how it started. And that was over a year ago. And so as we continue to live life then, knowing that depth of story in each other's lives, it affects many things. It affects how we talk about other issues that come up later. Like one of the guys in my DNA, I know about his relationship with his dad that he told that very first time. Well, his relationship with his dad colors many things that come up in his life. And so if I wouldn't have known that, when something came up in his life, I would not know the reason, the source, the roots of that thing. But because I know his story, I know this, broken part of it in relationship with his dad, our DNA immediately goes back to that and reminds him of who he is, of his sonship and his identity, that he's loved, that he doesn't have to prove anything to his dad, which he always felt like he needed to do. So we're constantly coming back to those parts of our story that we learn even from the very beginning. And so it's just it's very powerful. It's a very transformative reality when you communicate and are committed to each other like this in these DNAs.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of questions. So one is like, are you already friends when you start a DNA group? Like, how well would you typically know people? You talk about sharing the stories and things that you get to sort of get you started, but I imagine that you're not doing that every week. So
No.
what does a sort of a typical kind of evening when you guys get together with your DNA group, what are the things that you would try and go through? What sort of structure or content would you have for that couple of hours that you have every couple of weeks? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. I have a thought. Sure. One thing about the friendship piece, sometimes you have began a friendship. Sometimes what it is say there's some new people that become part of your gospel community or your missional community, and so they hear about this idea of DNA and they go, "What is that?" And you explain it and you say, if you ever wanted something like that in your life, we'd love to have you become part of one of our groups. But someone has to be ready and want that as well. So I have definitely started DNAs with people I hardly know at all. Usually it's a mix. Someone I've already become friends with. And the question is always, who else needs this? God, who do you want to be part of this? Because sometimes it's not always going to be the most comfortable thing. It's not like taking all your best friends and saying, hey, let's be even better friends. It's saying, how do we care for everybody well? One time I began in a DNA because I was new somewhere, and we literally didn't know each other. And we started out, and this friend of mine was separated at the time, and her husband had an affair, and she had a 6-week-old baby. And that was a raw reality she was in. And she shared her story, and I shared mine, and it was kind of awkward a little bit. And then she's one of my best friends to this day. So sometimes you don't know much. Sometimes you already know some. And I think that's what there will be different things that the Holy Spirit brings together, and it's never going to be a particular formula. But it's important for people in gospel communities to know that that's a really wonderful option if they want to do something like that. And it's kind of, sometimes they'll say, I'm not ready right now, maybe in a few months. And so, yeah.
But again, I'd say it's not finding all the people you like the best. It's basically saying, God, again, coming back to the proximity thing, God has placed us in this part of the city for a reason. He's placed us where we live for a purpose. So we're going to live life with this group of people, believing God has purpose in it for us to live like family, grow like family, influence each other like family, and then influence others outside like a family on mission. So many times, that's the determiner of who you're going to be in a DNA with. Again, is who you're in missional community with, because of where God has sent you to live your life. So,
although I want to clarify that sometimes there will be someone who isn't necessarily part of a missional community yet, but they are part of your church, and they want to be in a DNA. And that need comes to you, and so you talk with your DNA about it, and they might say, okay, it's not always people just from your gospel community. So there could be, I see the question there. I have had people who are brand new believers, brand new. And that's actually really beautiful, because then you have people who have been believers for 10 years, and then someone who's been a believer for 2 months. And it's very good for that young believer to be in a DNA with some who have been with Jesus longer, but also it's very good for that older believer to learn how to disciple and care for somebody who's just coming to faith. 2 different times in the past 10 years, I've actually had someone want to be part of a DNA group because they heard about how awesome it was, but I knew they actually weren't Christians yet. But they asked, and that's not your normal situation. But in both situations, because they really wanted it, we said yes, and we just acted like we normally would. But that's not your normal situation. It is usually for believers, however young or old.
And sometimes you might need to bump your DNA a little larger. Like she said, somebody new will come into the church, they move into your area, they get loosely connected to your missional community, but really love the DNA idea. You know, most people have not experienced something like that. So we've found that it's quite attractive usually. And so you might already have 4 or 5 people in your DNA, and adding one more feels like, that's a little big. It's starting to become, less intimate, but for a season, that's okay. You might pull them in for a season for 3 or 4 months. And then at that point, once they've really been relationally integrated, you could say, okay, how about if we multiply this DNA that's 6 people into 2 smaller DNAs of 3.
Yeah. And one thing that Phil asked, one thing about sharing stories, and one thing just about good question, Kate. How you spend your time. One thing about sharing your stories is the DNA I'm in right now, 3 of them or 2 of them had never really shared their whole life story with anybody. And so we had said, share as much or as little as you feel comfortable with. So and eventually, if there are things you don't feel comfortable sharing with right now about your story and who you are, you may feel comfortable later. But whatever is going to be helpful for you, share that. So it's not like this, if you become a part of a DNA group, you have to share every detail. No. It's like, whatever is comfortable for you. Leave out whatever you want, share whatever you want. This is a situation God is going to use for all of us. And so anyway, only really in the beginning do you share stories. That just helps so that we know each other at a certain level. In my particular DNA right now, we all we basically just some DNAs like to go through something, a book, reading something. They like to have some content they are going through and discussing when they're together. And that's great. Right now, my DNA doesn't want that. We just want to be together, and we each share very, very vulnerably and openly. How are we doing? What issues are we having in our life, in our marriage? What's making us sad? What do we need to process? And we each just share what's going on, and we ask questions of each other. We let each other cry or whatever, and we pray for each other. So ours is relaxed in its structure because that's the way our group likes it right now. You really have to just determine where your people are at and what they want to do. So the question from Kate was lifelong or short-term?
Basically,
definitely not lifelong.
Are you asking about the length of time?
Yeah.
So basically, because this is a subset of a missional community, our missional communities generally, not as this hard and fast rule, make a commitment for a year together. So the DNAs are also kind of going into it saying, we're going to be committed to this life together in this way for a year. So they make a plan for the year for their missional community. DNA is part of that. And then adjust throughout the year. You know, people will lose jobs, change jobs, move houses, have kids, get sick. There's all these circumstances in our lives. And so the missional community creates a plan at the beginning, but then adjusts along the way. But again, around those two goals of family and mission. And so they adjust and say, okay, things are changing right now because of these circumstances, but how do we continue to be good family? Things are changing right now. His schedule changed. She just had her third child, so now they have, 3 children under age 7. So how do we live on mission together with these new circumstances? So you're always adjusting, but generally we're saying, let's commit to a year, and then we will step back at the end of the year and we will assess how we go forward. Do we keep everything together? Do we keep everything similar for the next year? Or has our missional community got some new people into it, and so we need to multiply? Or maybe another missional community over there lost some people, moved to another city, moved to another country, and we have to say, you know what, we should probably send 1 or 2 people or 1 or 2 couples over there to strengthen that missional community because they lost some of their good people. So we need to send some over there. So that's the type of assessment and adjustment you're making, again, basically on a yearly basis. So similar with DNA, step back and say, okay, how do we want to continue this into the next year? Do we need to add anybody? Do we need to multiply? Do we need to start a new one? What needs to change?
Yeah, my DNA is actually having that conversation right now because of a couple new women that have become part of our community. We're asking, I wonder if we should change this up. Which is always sad because I like to stay with the people I love always. But the question, again, it's not about me, right? It's about what is God doing, who needs to be shepherded well. And so.
Yeah, I don't know if you asked that question or if that's on your mind. I hear it often from churches is multiplication for a lot of people sounds hard and painful. You've got this group that's living like family, your kids are getting to know each other, you're getting to know each other in these deep ways, and then you talk about splitting it up somehow. And there is a grieving to that.
Yeah.
But we need to keep coming back to our identity and our calling, what God has called us to in terms of like making disciples. If you're truly making disciples, there's an assumption in that there's growth. There's growth and there's fruit and there's more people involved, which requires multiplication. So if you've got this idea that, we started this group and we want to stay together for the next 5 years, that totally removes the idea of really discipleship and multiplication. Does that make sense?
Yep. One of the questions was, does a DNA group have a leader or someone who takes initiative, or is it shared and a bit more organic? How does that work?
Most of the times, I'm seeing the questions now. Most of the times, DNAs I've been in do require someone to be more leading than others. Maybe you want to call them more of a facilitator who makes sure they're happening. Maybe sends out a text, okay, are we still getting together tonight at 8:00? Or a reminder. And then that person does kind of lead the discussion, make sure each person's getting cared for. If they're going through a particular content, sometimes they'll go through content and then they are leading that. Right now, I happen to be in one where we don't really need a leader. That isn't usually the case. Usually you kind of need someone who's somewhat leading it. And so most of the years I've been in DNAs, it has turned out that I end up usually being the one who's kind of leading it. In certain seasons of my life, I felt like I needed to sometimes have a space where I wasn't leading. So I actually, at certain times in my life, I created another kind of a DNA-ish group that maybe met once a month with some other wives of missional community or gospel community leaders, where we could just have a place where we could really, really share with each other how we're doing and not have the pressure to be leading the situation. Because I felt that need in my own heart and for some women I knew. So, but that has been some seasons I needed it, some seasons I was okay. But it does help to have someone, I think, who is guiding it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like, often I'll use the language of facilitator rather than leader. Because really, once you get into living like this and communicating like this, it's very much shared. Like when I get together with my DNA guys, it's a very shared, there's shared responsibility there. It's not like they're waiting for Todd to say something or ask something. It's very much like we're in this together, trying to love each other together. We're trying to go deep together. We're going to ask questions. We're all going to ask questions. We're all going to, if the Spirit brings something to mind, we're all going to share, encouragement or challenge that the Spirit is giving. And so, yeah, very, very much shared. But like Hannah said, somebody who is facilitating a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you found any differences between men and women in terms of how they've taken to DNA groups? Have you found that they've a bit more harder work, or what have been your experiences in terms of getting them going for people who may not really experienced that before?
Yeah. We have found that sometimes with men, a little more structure is needed of what's going to happen during that DNA time, because men in general aren't quite as relational. And so women can talk for hours often with no problem. Men aren't so much. I'm stereotyping greatly, and it could be that in your marriages, you're the opposite, and I recognize that. But, and so sometimes I feel like with women, it's easier for us just to talk and be open and really go deep. And I think for men, sometimes a little bit more structure can help, as far as maybe certain questions they try to get to or to ask, or so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you guys, I don't know what it's like in Sweden, so I don't want to, but universally, I work in a lot of different countries, and I would affirm what Hannah said. Women are just more relational, and DNA is usually easier for them. Most men did not grow up in households where there was healthy communication. And so the idea of communicating vulnerably, the idea of, listening to another man's story and then knowing how to encourage him. Like most men just did not grow up with that. Most men are not in environments where like that is even seen as a good thing. It's kind of the opposite. Most men have grown up saying, protect yourself. Don't let anybody know you too well. That's dangerous. That's not good. And so you have to work against some of that. But I will say again, I've seen these DNAs work out in, I don't even know, 15 to 20 different countries. And the fruit from it in men's lives has been very significant. Very significant. I just talked to a guy, Phil, in from southern England, from Dawlish. You know where Dawlish is?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he started the DNA about 2 months ago. Never experienced anything like it. His guys had never experienced anything like it. And the second time he met with his DNA, he had to write me just to say, I've been in ministry for 30 years. He's actually got a PhD as a minister. And so very educated, very experienced. He said he'd just never experienced anything like it before. He was so excited about it.
Yeah. Right.
So excited about it. So
we've talked quite a bit about DNA groups, but at the start, it was like they're a part of, they're a feature of the gospel community. Could you talk to us a little bit about the kind of the impulse behind gospel communities? And then so the question was to kind of give a like an outline of you talked about planning for a month. What might that look like? So where do gospel communities come from, and what might a month, how do you think through life from a gospel community kind of point of view?
yeah, good. So again, I'll bring it back to just those two guiding values or principles of family and mission. So when a missional community sits down, again, you've got this group of people, could be 6 people, 8 people, 10 people that are saying, you know, we feel called to live life this way together as a family on mission. So let's sit down together and actually get specific about how we're going to organize and plan our lives around that. And I think that's really a key part of this, because I work with a lot of churches that have good intentions. You know, they hear this idea of family, they hear this idea of mission, they hear this idea of discipleship. It's like, man, that sounds great. Everybody wants that, right? Every church wants that. But then they don't get specific in the details. And so things just kind of never get there. They struggle to actually experience real family. They struggle to be consistent on mission with specific non-Christians in a regular, consistent way, because they never make specific plans. And so we had to sit down. We sit down fairly regularly with our gospel community to talk about our plans.
Well, I would say, so we kind of call it our core group in our current gospel community. So there's the couples that are together really committed to this. Then we have other people involved, but they're not really necessarily part of the core group that's trying to plan. And so at probably every 3 or 4 months, we will meet together and just talk about how it's been going. So I remember the first time we did this, it was really fun because it felt just like a brainstorming hangout time. We said, here we are. Here are the stages of life we're in. These are the things that we all have commitments to. What do you like to do? So one couple, they really love games. They love playing games, like board games. So they said, well, we really like to host game nights. That's really fun for us. And so we said, well, so what about you guys host a game night once a month on a Friday night? And then your friends know, and our friends know, that you host game nights on the 3rd Friday of every month. And so, and it was like, okay. And then another family, they like to host brunches, like breakfast, lunch on Saturdays. So they said, well, we love doing that. We don't like games. We don't, but we like that. Todd and I love to make fires, and we have a pool. And we also like doing movie nights in our driveway where we show a movie and everyone sits on the driveway and watches it.
Talking about a fire pit. We don't like to start random fires.
So, what I'm saying is we sat around, we brainstormed, we said, what do we like to do? What do we not like to do? I don't want to do something outside of my passion or my gifting. You know, I don't want to cook a gourmet meal for people. I have 5 kids. No way. So we had to say, what do we love doing? And then what's reasonable? So for our group, like 2 of them are doctors, you know, there's all these different schedules. So we decided that we would meet every other Sunday, all as a whole group, to have that time where we are eating together, praying together, caring for each other, reading our Bible, talking about the sermon, that growth time that will be every other Sunday, because we felt like every Sunday was too much for the people that are in our group right now. And then on those off weeks, we would do something that was missional in nature, that was easy and fun, and we can invite people to. So I think first and third weekends, we meet together in our home because we have the best home for meeting and we host that. And the second and fourth weekends, something is happening we're doing something where we can invite people that are in our lives that are not in relationship with God right now, or maybe they're on the way. And then so that's what we decided worked for us at that time. And even one of the times, like 2 other people had babies. And so kind of everything just went, and then we had to regroup and say, wow, life went crazy. Everyone got the flu, everyone had babies. Okay, now let's regroup and let's get back on track. Because it's never perfect. And sometimes your best plans just sort of fall apart. And so you start again.
And again, that's what families do, right?
Yeah.
Think about a family. A family's always adjusting, communicating. I'll highlight a couple things Hannah said. You heard in what she said, very specific detail, where that family said, we will host a game night the 3rd Friday night of every month at our place. You hear the specific detail of that. It makes a big difference. If people know, because everybody needs some level of planning in their lives. You've got work, you've got school, you've got kids, you've got, you've got to plan somewhat. Well, if you have some of those specific things locked into your schedule, each time you sit down to plan your month, it helps you to, it just helps you to organize the rest of your life around those things. Mm-hmm. So the people in our missional community know, okay, Wednesday nights are going to be DNA. Wednesday nights, the 1st and 3rd are women's DNAs, the 2nd and 4th are men's DNA. So when they sit down, again, we've got a busy doctor, a busy nurse, we've got busy people.
It's like you do. Yeah.
Yep. It's universal. So, but when they plan the rest of their life, they know Wednesday nights are DNA nights. As Hannah said, they know 2 Sundays, 1st and 3rd, are what we call our family meal nights. Everybody's going to be together. We're going to eat for about 90 minutes. Kids being loved on by all the families, and then we're going to spend another 90 minutes talking about, praying about, working on whatever we feel like the missional community needs that Sunday. So it's different. It's not Bible study every Sunday when we meet. Sometimes it will be. Sometimes we'll talk about the sermon from that Sunday morning, from our Sunday morning service. Sometimes we'll listen to somebody's stories. We had a situation recently where one of the women in our missional community, her husband had an affair. And so it was a very difficult, this is just a month ago or 2 months ago, very difficult. And so guess what we did that night? That night, she was the most important thing. Her story was the most important thing. We needed to hear what was going on with her and her husband. We needed to encourage her. We needed to speak the gospel to her. And then we needed to pray for her. So that's how we used that family meal night. Ate together, had fun, enjoyed each other, enjoyed the food, enjoyed each other's kids, and then cared for this woman who's going through a very significant marital crisis. So
There's a few good questions that came in. Irene's
Yeah.
first question was, you ask everyone who's part of the church to commit to being minister community. I mean, that depends on too in the leadership of your church and how they want to handle that. I know that in most churches we've been in, everyone in the church knows that we think it'd be really healthy for them and wonderful to be part of a missional community. But there needs to not be this unhealthy pressure, like, well, if you're not part of one, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. It needs to not feel negative, but a positive, like, hey, when you're ready, if you want to, this is what we really feel is the most helpful way to grow as a Christian and to reach the people in our city who don't know Jesus yet. So I think everyone is encouraged, but it's very important that they don't feel like, if they don't want to right then, that's okay. Come on Sunday, listen to the word, get to know some people. Sometimes maybe they're in the last semester of school and they just don't feel like they should commit to anything new. That's fine. And so I think it's important to be positively encouraging people, but to leave space for the many people who don't want that right now for whatever reasons that are happening in their life.
but they are going to hear about it every single week.
Yeah.
So every Sunday morning, there's a little 1 minute, 2 minute encouragement to say, it's great that we can gather here on Sunday morning, every Sunday morning at 10 a.m., but this is not primarily the life of the church. We would say this is good, this is essential, but the primary life of the church, we believe, is lived out in our gospel communities. And so literally every single Sunday morning, that is communicated from the front.
The people are encouraged and they're reminded what gospel communities there are if they would like to visit one or whatever. So basically that our life as Christians happens 7 days a week, and Sunday happens to be one day where some really important things happen, but the other 6 days are so important. And here's ways you can be involved in the church family in that way. So that's so much up to your leadership and how they want to. And you have to know you have to know your church. Maybe you communicate that differently because of the unique church body you have. And then that's up to the leadership of the church to listen to the Holy Spirit on that. As far as kids, so we just have always, right now in our gospel community, if everyone comes that night,
16.
There's like 16 kids. Now, not everyone always is there, okay? But and that isn't actually ideal to have 16 kids. It just happens to be what we're in right now.
Yeah, we're saying that with a little painful,
Yes.
with the painful feeling of saying this is not sustainable.
Yeah. Okay. But although now we're in quarantine, so we can't even meet, and so it's not an issue right now. But in the past, we just have different people take. So you eat together, play together, talk, and then at one point it's like, okay, younger kids, you get to go in these rooms now and play, and then everyone else will stay out. And obviously, little ones run back and forth sometimes or whatever. But I know some gospel communities. Yes, usually you have like 2 adults, or often it's like at our gospel community, 1 adult, and then I have teenagers, so one of my other kids will help. I have 11 and 10-year-old too. We have, so they'll also help as long as there's 1 adult. And sometimes we'll play some games or do some things, but then often we'll let them watch something. Some people feel very passionate about doing something very specific with the children, maybe a lesson or a craft. That's great. Personally, I don't want to take that on, and no one else does either. So we let them watch a fun movie, and they love it. And that's easy for us. But maybe that's the easiest, laziest way. That's currently, and I don't feel this pressure as a gospel community leader that we're supposed to be, providing a Bible lesson. But the parents are responsible all week to teach their kids about Jesus. And
yeah, the kids are getting lots of other spiritual input in other places at other times. And so we don't feel this weird pressure to say, man, every time we meet, it's got to be super spiritual for the kids.
They love each other. They get so excited to see each other, and that's great. They're a family. But if you have a person in your gospel community who feels very passionately about wanting to create some specific structure for the kids, then that's wonderful. And you say, that sounds great.
You're not trying to do Sunday morning at a gospel community, are you? You're not trying to have the elements of now have some worship and now we've got kind of kids things and someone's going to share you're not doing mini church, are you?
No. And sometimes, like, if the weather is nice, all the kids go outside in the yard and they just play. They play together, balls and.
Yeah, that's a great point, Phil. We've already got Sunday morning. It's like, why reproduce it again? It's like Sunday morning is good and it's serving its purpose, but we don't need to do it a second time. We need other types of things. And so Sunday morning accomplishes one thing. DNA accomplishes another thing, as we spent a lot of time talking about. And then missional community accomplishes other things. That's the beauty of this, is you've got these three structures that complement. Mm-hmm. Each of them serve unique purposes. We don't want missional community just to be a smaller version of Sunday morning. We already have Sunday morning. We don't need another Sunday morning. One Sunday morning a week is enough, we believe. And so we need to be accomplishing other things during those family meal nights, and then during our game nights, movie nights, parties, brunches, that we are doing together on mission, again, to very specific non-Christian people that we feel called to.
Look, guys, I sent through, I think everyone should have had copy of Todd's sort of PDF of the three structures of a church, but just in case you haven't looked at that and we're not checking up on you, but Todd, could you or Hannah just like when you might do on a Sunday morning, you kind of laying it out and going, this is, these are our three structures. Here's our quick sort of elevator pitch for Sunday, gospel community and DNA, and that they cover these things. Like you say, they've each got their own purpose. So kind of, would you have a crack at sort of how you would pitch it as if we were turning up at New City Church on Sunday morning?
Yeah. So Sunday morning, no surprise. I mean, it's an opportunity for the whole family to be together, to worship, to celebrate, to encourage, to tell stories, to experience communion together. It's obviously unique in the content and what we're doing, but it's also unique because it's a larger group of people. It's a larger relational dynamic. So that's why we do Sundays. I believe it's essential in that way. DNA then, as we've already said, is this small, intimate, gender-specific environment for deep gospel work to happen in the hearts and minds of people. So those are kind of like the bookends. We would say ultimately, primarily though, the missional community is the primary environment for discipleship because it is a life together. Sunday is a 2-hour meeting. DNA is a 2-hour meeting. Okay, you get that? Those are the bookends. 2-hour meeting Sunday morning. We meet from 10 to 12. DNA, Hannah said, guys usually meet 2 hours. Ladies go longer in their DNAs. So many times up to 3 hours. But those are the bookends. But the missional community is a life together. It's where there's a planned element to what you're doing, which we already talked about, creating a monthly plan. But there's also a spontaneity to it, where you might, the Spirit puts somebody on your heart, and you're like, I think I'm going to call up, Ross and see if he wants to come over, come over for a meal tonight. So many times, yeah, exactly. That's a response we get too. Many times, again, think family. Your missional community does not have to do everything with everybody together for it to count. Like parts of the family can do smaller things, spontaneous things, and those are often some of the richest things. So sometimes in the morning I wake up, I'm going to, going about my work day, and it's like, I think I'm going to call Ramiro, who's part of my DNA and part of our gospel community. I think I'm going to call him, just see how he's doing, see if he wants to go, for a walk after work. And so you see the spontaneity of that, where it's not part of our monthly plan. It's where now I'm thinking about our community as a family. And so we're gonna call somebody or text somebody and say, you want to do a meal, want to go for a walk, want to hop on our bicycles, want to take our kids to the park. And so those things are sprinkled in also throughout the month. And again, they're easy to execute because we live close together. It's not a big task to meet at the local park because we live a few minutes from that local park and they live a few minutes from that local park. So we can text them 2 hours before dinner and say, you guys got time after dinner tonight? Why don't we take our kids to the park and kick soccer ball? Why don't we take the kids to the park and ride their scooters? And so you've got this planned element for your missional communities and then the spontaneous element for your missional communities. But again, that's the big thing, is that it's a life together. You can't reinforce that enough with your people. It's not a series of meetings per se. It's not a series of programs per se. It's a group of people that are really considering a life together like a family that has regular mission integrated into it. So again, the mission stuff we do, we don't see that as like a bunch of programs either. I mean, the stuff Hannah described, brunches and movie nights and game nights, times at the park, times at the beach, walks through the neighborhood. For us, that's all mission. But it's natural, normal stuff, right? And by the way, doesn't that sound like fun stuff? So often in churches, when they hear mission or evangelism, it sounds like, work. It sounds like,
Or people feel shame, like, oh, I haven't shared the gospel with anybody for a long time. That's not my gifting. That makes me scared. Instead of just saying, how can we, like if I'm going to invite someone I know who isn't a Christian to go to the park or something, then I quick think of the women in my gospel community and I think, who else might be free tomorrow? And I think about them and then I invite them quick. Because they're like my team.
Yeah.
They're my team for my people in my life who don't know Jesus yet, but I know that are ready and they know why I want them to hang out with my friend. Yes, singles.
Can I say one thing before Hannah answers that? I love when she was talking earlier about this neighbor that she saw this morning. Just this idea that Hannah's pretty amazing in how she pursues and loves other women and moms like that, but she's still limited. She's still limited in her ability to love this woman.
Absolutely.
But when she pulls other women from our gospel community into this relationship with this neighbor, they together, Hannah used the word team, it's like a team, they together have much more capacity to love. And so after the virus is over, this woman is going to be introduced to, 3 or 4 other women that are going to love her exponentially more than Hannah is able to. And it's true for all of you. You can love to a certain extent, but you're going to love your coworkers or your neighbors or your relatives better when you have a team of people that are committed to working together to love well. So again, that's one of the big whys. We would say that's one of the big whys for living life like this.
And I don't know if you think each of you have been Christians for a certain number of years, and you've probably known certain people who have come to faith in Jesus. And so many times it starts with one relationship. You meet one Christian, and then many times, at least in our decades really of ministry, we've known that what was powerful is when that person then who wasn't a Christian yet then met a few others. Different people, different stories, different ways they came to faith, and they saw the interaction there. And so I just feel like for me, I know how powerful it is. Because for many of you too in Sweden, my goodness, like there aren't very many believers. And so like when we lived in the Czech Republic, Christians were seen as like cult. They were part of a cult. And so how powerful was it if I was the only Christian friend of someone, and that someone thought basically Christians were part of a cult? How powerful is it when I can introduce that person to a couple other people and they go, oh, they're normal, they're kind, they're loving. I'm sensing the presence of Jesus. They don't know that. But anyway, so I think that's what's so different than being a part of a church where there's no groups that are working together, because you develop a relationship with someone who's not Christian, but you don't really know how to then introduce them into other people's lives. It's hard. And I see the power in that. That's often how God brings people closer and closer to salvation, is by meeting more people that are genuine believers.
Yeah, interesting little, there was some research done many years ago, and I've talked about it with churches around the world, so I found it to be anecdotally true universally. But the research found that the average non-Christian is going to need to become friends with 5.3 Christians before they give their life to Jesus. Well, what's in that statistic? It doesn't matter if it's 5.3 or 4.7 or 6.1. What's in that statistic is that in most cases, again, the Holy Spirit can override, and you know the stories where this isn't the case, but in most cases, your friends and coworkers who don't know Jesus are going to need to know 4.3 others as friends in addition to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to do it alone. It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen with you alone. It's going to happen with you and 4.3 others. And so we have to say, okay, so how do we create regular environments where I can get my non-Christian coworker around 4 or 5 others to become friends, to hear their stories. Like Hannah said, to see that it's not a cult, that these people are normal, they're generous, they're loving, they're gracious, and it's all because of Jesus.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. Is that still all right with you, Todd and Hannah? You're right for another 15 minutes or so? Is that okay?
Our kids are very quiet. I hope that everything is okay.
Yeah, when we all know that feeling when silence troubles us more than noise. So we've got a few questions. One of which Ross asked the same one as I was about to ask. So you've got you talked about proximity. So a little bit, what happens if you've got something in common, but actually you don't live near each other? And kind of related to that would be, what if you want to, you love the idea of being in a gospel community, but no one lives near you? Like, how do you get something going if it's just you or your family in an area, and people are further away than, you know, what happens then? How do you get started? So two things around the kind of proximity question.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let me say to Kate's question quick. Absolutely. We do mix up singles and families as much as possible. We believe that youngers need olders, olders need youngers, singles need marrieds, marrieds need singles, families without kids need families with kids need families. Like, that's where some of the richest spiritual formation and discipleship happens, is through the diversity. And so, yes, we actually try to stay away from segmenting these missional communities to a certain segment of life.
But then naturally, sometimes depending on location or whatever, that will happen more where one gospel community will just tend to have
Yeah.
more young singles than others, and that's fine. But we do want to encourage people to,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's good. That's to the next question. Then what do? You've got these singles. They're in the four corners of Stockholm. I mean, honestly, going back to what we've been saying about family and this idea of the overlap of relationship, for that to work, from our experience, the only way we've found that it can work is if those people living that far apart have some very, very strong affinity. So it is possible, but it does require a very strong affinity that is either work-based, probably, or hobby-based. So like where we lived before, there was a missional community that formed around musicians. It was these musicians lived scattered all around the city. But because they were musicians, they had this lifestyle together where they were practicing together, writing songs together, meeting at the same clubs together to listen to different bands. So they had this built-in affinity that was very strong. And they lived like a family of musicians, even though they were scattered around the city. We had another missional community form around workers at a specific hospital. So this is a work-based example. Again, they lived scattered around the city, but these doctors and nurses worked at the same hospital. And so they said, wow, we live a lot of life at the hospital. And then when our shift is done, a lot of our coworkers actually like to go out for a drink or a meal or something together. And so again, there's more life lived together. And so they formed a missional community focused on the relationships that are happening at that hospital. Another missional community formed around the workers at an Apple computer store, where similarly they were like, wow, we spend 50 hours a week here at the Apple computer store, and so do our coworkers. And then after work, a lot of them like to go out. And so they realized there was a lot of built-in life together, work, eating, even playing on weekends, that all the workers at the Apple computer store were doing naturally. And so they were like, why would we not form a missional community around that? It's already there. It's already built in. So whether it's musicians or hospital or the Apple computer store or that coffee shop, we had another one formed around a specific coffee shop that had similar relational dynamics. So does that make sense?
I think too, Ross, and your wife, that you can talk about all these things, but this may seem obvious, but just really praying and asking God to give really clear direction on what to do, saying, these are the people I believe you put in my life. This is how this started. What do you want for this? Help me to help us to think creatively, because we're giving examples, but that doesn't really matter. The idea is that Holy Spirit can help you figure out what to do. So are talking with those people and brainstorming with them and praying and saying, how can we do this?
Yeah.
And so,
And and you guys know, if you've got an idea, like, again, you're working at your workplace, you're like, man, I really wish something could happen here. Just that desire, that conviction, that's coming from the Holy Spirit. That's not just something you conjured up, okay? That's something he wants you to take seriously and wants you to move towards. And so, like Hannah said, this thing that's stirring in you, then you start to talk about with some others from your church and say, what do you think? Can you imagine something happening at, in that neighborhood or around that CrossFit group, or maybe that group of moms that seem to go to that same park regularly? And so, does that make sense? Where you start talking about it a little more specifically with some others, start praying about it a little more specifically with some others, and that's how all these things get started. But even the initial idea, the seed of the idea, that's not coming from you. That's coming from the Holy Spirit, who does want you to respond to it in some way, which should be encouraging. I mean, it's cool that he's doing that kind of work in our hearts regularly to send us to influence people in the places where he's put us. And that's the whole point. He's put us where we live for purpose. Mm-hmm. He's put you in your apartment or your house there in the neighborhood for a purpose. Your work, whatever your job is, guess what? He's put you there for a purpose. He wants you to bring some form of influence there. So it's really encouraging when we understand that there's purpose. There's purpose in every place we go. There's purpose in everything we do, because that's that's who he is, and that's who he has saved us, basically to be, and how he saved us to live.
A little bit on the one, what would you do if you haven't got other people around you and you really want to be in a gospel community? Like what do you do then? Like, I'd love this would be great, and you look around and there's no one close by. What would you say to someone in that position?
Yeah. For us, again, hopefully it's for a season. But for a season, they would say, okay, so who is the closest, or what? Again, if it's an affinity-based, group, which one is the most? It just seems the best for me to connect to for a season, until hopefully that community that you're part of can send a few to go with you, either back to your neighborhood, or be, again, creating some kind of affinity-based group. Does that make sense? But for that season, it does require, I mean, we had people that we just said, for these next 6 months, you're going to have to drive. You're going to have to drive.
Be part of our group,
be part
learn,
of it,
be loved, be cared for, and let's just pray and see what the next step is for you. I mean, sometimes
you talked about people going from a community to go with you. So do you do that as well? You sort of have people who for a season will kind of go, okay, it isn't our area, but we're going to come and serve you in your area to hopefully get something going and do it for a year and see how that goes. Is that the sort of thing as well that you see happening?
Yep, absolutely.
Well, and a lot of growth can happen in that, like, say that individual or family does drive 30 minutes or an hour to be part of another gospel community for the next 6 months or a year. There's so much growth and learning happening in them during that time. And then you just have to say, who knows what God might do next? Maybe there's going to be someone they meet in their area. You just don't know. When we moved here, there was no one in our area. But this was the only area we could afford to buy a house. And so it was the only area. And And so we moved here, and we were disappointed that there was no one in our church family.
There was no one anywhere near.
No, but it was what we could afford financially. So, but we couldn't have known it. But then there ended up being 2 or 3 different situations, some people we met, and within a year we have a gospel community in this area. But we did not foresee that. We just prayed and we hoped, and so.
Yeah. Well, what's cool, going back to what I said and what she said, is that so we landed here for the reason she said.
Finances, affordability.
We start thinking and praying and talking to others, and this will happen. I've seen it happen many times. One couple that is now part of our core, Hannah just met the mom at the park. It was such a God orchestrated thing. It's like, how does that happen? And then the second couple that joined us, they joined us because we challenged them, encouraged them to move close to us.
They were needing to move anyway.
Needing to move.
Young couple. They wanted to be with some older people. And so they decided to move closer to our area. But we didn't know any of that was going to happen. And like the one couple, the mom I met at the park, they had just moved into the area and they were looking for a church. And we started talking, and they ended up.
They're from another part of the country.
Yeah,
they just moved in.
So, yes, I guess. But to answer that first question, we've seen many people say, "I'm going to spend the next 6 months or a year with that gospel community," because Christians need to be cared for and loved and shepherded and as family, and then we'll just see what happens. Yeah.
So Phil, what I've seen many times to your question is, say you're out by yourself on the north side of the city. Well, as long as you're not thinking in these types of ways, like usually other people aren't thinking about it. Other people aren't praying about it, right?
About what?
About reaching your part of the city. It's just Phil and his wife stuck on the north side of the city alone. Well, when you start saying, okay, I'm going to join Ross's missional community for a while, and we're just going to say, Ross's missional community, we believe God has put us in the north part of the city for a reason. We don't even know what it is yet. We don't know how it's going to look yet, but we believe we're supposed to somehow plant a missional community here. And so Ross's missional community then joins you, Phil, to start praying for your neighborhood and your part of the city. And then you start saying, what if one time every 2 to 3 months, Ross's missional community helps Phil throw a bigger party, a bigger neighborhood event, a bigger meal that he couldn't do alone? And so they just start to throw some of the seed out there like that. They're praying with Phil. They're starting to cultivate some relationships with Phil just to see where it'll go. Well, when you do that, then these types of things, like Hannah described, can happen. We work with a church in Bucharest, Romania, and many people through the last 10 years have moved strategically because of what I just described, where there was nobody even living in that part of the city.
It's a huge city.
Huge city.
I mean, you guys are in a huge city too.
Nobody lived in that part of the city, but they felt like somebody needed to plant something in that side of the city. So they said, when somebody is ready to move, either because of their job or because they need a bigger place or they need a cheaper place or whatever, we are going to intentionally move to that part of the city. And so there's one part of Bucharest where nobody lived previously. Now there are probably 6 families living there that moved in there intentionally over the last 5 years and are now living in community and influencing lots of people. Where people will start to make decisions differently when you start thinking and praying and casting this type of vision. They'll say, what part of Stockholm needs the next missional community? Okay, better start praying for that. Okay, who's going to move there?
Yeah.
Next time somebody has a chance to move, who's going to move there? You know, be the first to be present in that part of the city where we believe God's calling us to. So we have seen many families move intentionally or strategically for these purposes.
Not just families, singles and
Singles,
Yeah.
all kinds, but move strategically and intentionally for the sake of mission and for the sake of seeing gospel influence brought to a specific neighborhood or specific part of the city where it does not exist.
Todd, thank you so much. So, guys, just say, we've long talked about the picture of lights over the city of Stockholm being connected, of something in every station stop. We've had this language of the kind of direction we feel that God wants to take us in as a church. We've also put a lot of emphasis on trying to be family together and to love one another. And yet we've sort of also found ourselves kind of a little bit missing the vehicles that would help us connect those two things together, particularly as the church has grown in kind of substantial and different ways than we might have expected. So one of the opportunities that we've had through this sort of coronavirus sort of shutdown or scale down for us is and I think in God's timing, sort of bringing, sort of kind of waking me up to connecting with Todd again, was let's have a look at this. And so we haven't made decisions. Nothing is. We're just trying. This is an opportunity to present a way of living and a way of being church and a way of reaching our city that I find personally very appealing. But it's for you to kind of be able to then hear and to now pray about and think, what are the questions? Do you find yourself thinking about it? What's the difference between where we are or where you are in your group and the sort of thing that Todd and Hannah have described, and so that we can begin to kind of wrestle with some of the practical questions and work out together if this is the way that we want to invest and train and kind of take our church towards. And Hannah and Todd have been, kind of so generously made themselves available to help us if we want to go down that route together. So that's just a kind of recap as to why we're having this long and fascinating conversation at all.
Late at night.
Yeah, there was a point to it all. So I'm just going to pray. I'm going to pray for Todd and Hannah just because we want to bless them, and we're so grateful to them giving us their time, and we'll just pray that their house is still standing and their kids are still living, and
Still quiet.
The silence is golden rather than anything else. And then guys, write down your questions and we can share them and we can follow up. This is not a one-off thing. Hopefully there'll be other opportunities to follow up and dig into specific things as we figure out how God is leading us together. Is that okay?
Awesome.
Great. So I'm going to pray, and then we'll draw our time together to a close. Heavenly Father, we thank you that we come to you as your children, that this just where we always start, that we are your sons and daughters, and we get to call you Abba Father. We get to enjoy your goodness and your grace to us through Jesus Christ, and that you've called us out of darkness into your light, but into a worldwide family. And we represent that here in Stockholm, but we're such a blessing to be connected and feel your family together with Todd and Hannah in California. And we just pray your blessing on them and on their family, that you'll protect them in this time, and their community will flourish, their DNA groups will grow in this strange days that we're living in. And while the world might be shaken, that we, your people, would not, because our confidence and our hope is in you. And so, Father, we just pray your blessing on them and on their family and on their church. And thank you for the way that your people serve one another, and that we've been served by them this evening. And Father, we just pray that you will help us and guide us, and your Spirit would speak to us and lead us as we we would be able to say, yeah, this seemed good to the Holy Spirit, and then also to us, as we seek to serve Stockholm and bring the light of Jesus Christ to those that don't know you. So yeah, we thank you for your goodness and trust ourselves into your hands. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.